Welcome to History Chats this afternoon. Today we are talking about the Plat Map, or alternatively the Plat Book, which is actually kind of the same thing in some ways. This is a Plat Book, right? This is a book of maps, and individually these are Plat maps. Now, because of the format that we're dealing with, it's rare for you just want an individual map because of, you'll kind of get the sense of this. Each plat map is just a section of the county. So, you know, but the maps are pretty consistent, you know, from the early years. This is a plat book here from, let's see, I think this is 1882. And it has, you know, it's a leather-bound book. It's kind of portable. It's got pages that you can flip through to see this, you know, all the way to 2019, which is, you know, it's got color pictures, actually satellite views that you can kind of line up with the line drawings, which can be kind of hard to judge what it looks like in you know, today. So there's a lot of variety. They've been published usually at the behest of the county in some form, either by a local entity, you know, a local printer, or, you know, the county itself sometimes puts them out. Sometimes they have the help of local organizations, usually agriculture-related organizations like the 4-H clubs often help, you know, put this all together. More recently, you know, things have moved to, like, publishing out of state or actually online. Today, you can go, you know, right now if you wanted to, and you know, look up I think the GIS map, I think is what this is called, from the county, where you can actually, it's an interactive map. You've got the whole application, and you can go around and click on any of these, you know, sections, and it'll tell you, you know, ownership and tax stuff and all that fun stuff. But regardless of, you know, whether you're using it online or you're going to a physical, you know, map, basically what plat maps exist to do is to allow us to locate property, sort of the borders and where they are, and who owns that property, particularly in the unincorporated parts of the county, which is not always the case. There's some gray area there. Certainly there are some years in which they do, you know, have city maps and village maps as well, more common later on, but, you know, 1901, there's one with that. And sometimes, you know, as we'll see, maybe today the border between a town and a village or a city is not quite as obvious from this perspective. But generally, when we say unincorporated parts, what we're talking about is this gets down to definitions of municipal organization. So this is the Marathon County, right? We've got our rectangle with the notch cut off. And generally, there are three kind of levels of, if you want to think of it this way, base level government. There's the county organization that keeps track of a lot of, you know, different stuff and a lot of services. But then you have in blue, the unincorporated lands, which is what we call towns or townships. That's the way they've been organized. And then in red, there's the incorporated bits. So if a community gets large enough, they can ask the government to say, hey, we want to become a village. They can incorporate as a village. And if the village gets large enough, then they can become a city. I don't think that you don't jump straight to the city. Usually you have to go through the village process. And that often meant, like, you know, for example, Athens incorporates. And when it does, it annexes part of the towns around it in order to create Athens. In the 21st century, we have some interesting stuff happening, like the town of Maine and Kronenwetter, in which they just take the whole town and become a village. But that's historically not as common. And there's some other stuff that goes with that. But, you know, you have a couple different levels here, right? You have the towns, the cities, and the villages. So in yellow, we have villages. Red is the Yellow is the cities. Red is the villages, and blue are the towns. Before I get much further, though, we should probably define a town, because it's not quite as straightforward. So if you go on the internet and you ask, you know, what is a town, you might get something like, this is a blog from Grammarly.com, in which they want to make it clear that, hey, there's specific things that these fall into, and you want to be sure that you're talking about a city versus a town versus a village, because there's an order here, right? Villages are smaller than a town, which is smaller than a city. And you know, that's the same. It's what Wikipedia says. Here's what a town is. It's generally larger than a village and smaller than a city. But that's not the way it works in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, there is no municipal level of town that fits that category. Instead, and it's not necessarily just Wisconsin. There are other states in Wisconsin. So in the United States, the way that I want to say it was in the Bill of Rights, but I could be wrong. In the Constitution, you know, whether it's the Bill of Rights or not, they basically say, hey, locals, individual states have the ability to decide how they want to make things or organize their municipalities. And so in Wisconsin, they decide to take these things, with basically 6 by 6 mile squares, which were used to survey the area, and they just make those towns. And towns are basically, you know, there is some services that they provide. There is a town board, elected positions usually, and some supervisors. And they generally do, you know, maintain roads and bridges, because you don't necessarily want, you know, if you're living out in the town of Hewitt, you probably have a better idea of what needs to be done than people at, you know, the courthouse in Wausau. And same thing with like fire services and emergency response things. Like if usually there is a volunteer fire in some capacity, or you know, first responder for medical things. Because hey, if your barn's on fire in the town of Hewitt, again, you don't want to have to wait for a fire truck to come out from Wausau. So you want to have that sort of response. And there's a couple other things that they do, but that's kind of, you know, a lot of the services that you'd expect from a city or a village, you know, utilities and, you know, sewage and, you know, that sort of stuff, not as common in the townships. And I'm gonna, for this point, I'm gonna try to say townships after town because it's confusing enough. You know, Marathon City is a great example. Marathon City is not a city, it's a village. And so a bunch of Germans came here in the 1850s expecting to go to what is Marathon City. I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but it turns out there is no Marathon City. They were kind of told, hey, there's this place called Marathon City, didn't exist. But they bought land there, so they then create a place that becomes, they call Marathon. So then the township gets named after them, the town of Marathon, which isn't a city or a town in the traditional sense, but a township. And then they create a village that incorporates, that they call Marathon City, even though it's not a city, it's a village. And, you know, it gets confusing enough. So we're going to try to keep our terminology as straight as possible. So the main thing I wanted to say is that a plat map or plat book typically deals with this. It's not the incorporated parts, it's the unincorporated parts of the community. And let's kind of jump ahead and let's just look at an example, right? So this is a land document issued by the government saying 1859 is the year. James Buchanan, sitting president, signed it or had somebody sign it for him. And this is a document that says that 160 acres of land was been sold to a guy named John Christian Niemann. He sometimes goes by Johann, I believe. So John or Mr. Niemann, he buys 160 acres of land. Now you might, the thing is, where is that land? And that you have to go to this bit here. And I know I probably can't read that, so I'm just going to run through it here. So the description here, and this is the legal description of the land that he bought, is the southwest quarter of Section 11 in Township 30 north of Range 5 East in the District of Lands subject to sale at Stevens Point, Wisconsin, containing 160 acres. Which is a lot. So let's parse that out. What does that actually mean? Well, we can kind of initially get rid of the District of Land subject to sale at Stevens Point. That just means that's where the land office is. There is no land office in Wausau, so if you're buying, you know, a land in Marathon County, at this point in time, you would buy it in Stevens Point. So then what's left? Well, the thing you start with, if you're going to try to figure out, okay, where is this land? You start with township and range, because this gives us the coordinates to figure out what, you know, 6 by 6 mile square we're looking at. So for this, we need to kind of go back briefly and talk about the development of the United States. I'll try to keep it brief because it could, you know, go on for a while. But basically, after the Revolutionary War, we become independent from Britain, which is great, except now we have all these debts. And we've got all this land that we've won all the way to the Mississippi, and Jefferson, third president, he buys Louisiana Purchase, taking it all the way to the Pacific. So we got all this land, but we don't have a way to sell it to people yet because we have to. So basically we send out surveyors, they create those 6 by 6 mile grids as a way to survey the land. And typically in the areas where, they need to survey it, he sends people out here. That's the system that they do. By surveying the land, then you can sell the land. And if they sell the land, it does two things. In Jeffersonian sort of ideals, it gets cash flow because, in the early years, we had a lot of debts that we had to pay as a federal government and not a lot of revenue going on. So, hey, that gets cash into the hands of the government so they can pay back the people that you need paying back. And also it puts people on the land, and it goes from being there's some problems here with like Native Americans being there, but from the perspective of like Jefferson and his contemporaries, a lot of this land wasn't being used to its best potential. And if we sell the land, then people are going to come out and they're going to cut down the trees, make use of the resources, they're going to farm, they're going to make it profitable. And so it's a kind of a win-win here. So, hey, survey everything. And so the way that they do this then is they have these different, into each color, there is basically a set of township range numbers that corresponds to this. So in Wisconsin, we use the fourth principal meridian, which is this yellow bit, this line that goes north-south. And then there's a baseline in Wisconsin that is right at the southern border between Illinois and Wisconsin. So if we look at the map itself, this is what it ends up being. So going back, again, you can see the 6 by 6 mile grids that they create as a way of surveying everything. And we look at, Township 30 North. So we start from the baseline, which is at the very bottom here, and we go up to 30 of these squares to right here. So this is the grid that the rank that we're at. Then we look at range 5 east. That means we range to the east 5 more squares. That puts us right here. Now in Wisconsin, there's only ever going to be north townships. There's no southern townships. In other states there are. But yeah, that's how we find this. So again, looking at townships here in Wisconsin, we know if you open a plat book, it'll have these numbers: 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and then we go over 5 to 5, and it's Hamburg. So that tells us that Mr. Niemann bought some land in the town of Hamburg. Except for two things. One, that actually, one of the interesting things is, like, remember going back to the description, it doesn't say it's in Marathon County. It doesn't say that it's in the town of Hamburg. It just says, here's the range and township and range numbers. And the reason for that is, that's number one. Number two, that's not the town of Hamburg in 1859. If we go back to the early history of the county, this is the entirety of, it's the modern day Marathon County. When Marathon County gets created in 1849, I think, the borders go all the way north to Lake Superior. Now, as time goes on, that gets cut off. But basically the idea was, they didn't expect that to be the final borders of the county. Definitely not. But there's nobody living up there. There's only people really in, there's the Big Bull Falls, which becomes Wausau. There's a couple people in the other falls, Little Bull Falls and Mosinee, up in what's going to become Merrill. But there's not a big population there. And as over the next couple decades, more people go up there, then we're going to cut that off and create Lincoln County. And it's not just, this is just the town of Wausau, because that's the only municipality that they're worrying about. But if we step forward a couple years here and we keep going, you can see the creation of new townships. Because, hey, now there's people living in Marathon, so let's create a Marathon and Mosinee. And, as time goes on, that's going to change. So in 1859, when Mr. Niemann buys this land in, 30 North, Township 30 North, Range 5 East, it's actually in the town of Berlin. Now, if we continue to step forward, eventually we are going to see the creation of Hamburg and its creation of the normal borders. But this just kind of shows, and this is kind of interesting, because if you look at the development of this, like, it's pretty easy for us to just look at a modern plat map and go, oh, they were here. But the sense of community around townships, that doesn't really emerge in all these cases. Even 1883, when we have Hamburg finally get its borders, that 6 by 6 mile square, which, by the way, they didn't need to. Now in Wisconsin, we use the survey townships because it's a nice, convenient area. But in other states, they don't necessarily do that. It's not one-to-one. They don't necessarily have to do that. But in this case, they do. And by 1883, you can see that, okay, well, you have the German, the North Germans coming up here. You've got like Marathon and Mosinee getting set up. You have the western edge of the county. The railroads have gone through, but there's still some really big open areas. And that, even if we jump to like 1910, it's getting more filled in. again, because more people settle in these areas, but there's still some areas left to go. We still haven't quite gotten to what we're going to see. But yeah. But that aside, we can look at this and say, okay, we know we're in Hamburg, or at least this section, this 6 by 6 mile square. So now we know at 30 Township 30 North, Range 5 East. Let's look at the next section, which is Section 11. So where in this 6 by 6 mile square are we looking at? Well, a section is a 1 by 1 mile square. So remember, it's a 6 by 6 mile square. They divide that up into 36 1 by 1. So start up here with number 1. This is a section. And then the numbering goes along, kind of snakes around until you have 36 of them. And it always goes in this direction. But we're looking at 11, so we're going to pull that back to find here is 11. Great, now we know what section it is. Now we can look at the southwest quarter, which is this one. Now, this doesn't say Mr. Neiman because back in 1883, John Neiman's daughter, Elena, gets married to a dairy farmer from West Bend named Frederick Fromm. And Fromm did not have any prospects at that point. It didn't look like he was going to inherit any land. He was one of the younger sons. And so he ends up getting, as part of the betrothal, the dowry, they give them, the young couple, this quarter section of land. And so then they start the farm, and that's how the Fromm farm gets started. Yeah. But just before we move on, this is a pretty straightforward example. It's a quarter section. It can get more complicated. So for example, if we look at C.A. Weller up here to their north, this is a little bit more complicated because we can't just say the northwest section quarter because it's half of that. It's 80 acres and not 160. So in this case, you would say that it is the eastern half of the northwest quarter of section 11 and so on and so forth. And this can get kind of complicated as things go. But one of the interesting things that comes from this is you'll notice that there aren't, and even to this day, if you look at it today, there aren't that many plots of land. Like it's all north, south, east, west. There's no lines that go, I mean, unless there's like an easement for like a railroad or something, you don't see diagonals very often. And even then, you don't see not straight lines. And this has led to, if we look at, here's Google Maps satellite view. Here's Wausau. If we go out to the rural areas, you can see it has this very grid-like pattern because they build the roads around the townships and the sections within the townships. And even if we look at like the farms, this is a very Midwest sort of farming thing. And the reason, because you can kind of see where, oh, well, this is sort of this chunk here. It's a half of a quarter section here, there, different farmers, that's the land that they have. And you can often, it literally has created a new landscape because of the way that we adopt and sell farms, which is kind of interesting to see that area. But I teased the Fromms just to kind of bring us forward. So if you're not familiar with the Fromm brothers, Frederick's sons, 4 of his sons, are going to go on to become really influential farmers. They're going to get into the ginseng trade and perfect that. By 1913, they are ginseng farmers. And Edward, the oldest of the 4 siblings, they had 2 older brothers that were kind of longer story we won't get into today, but Edward is now in charge. He takes over for his father. About a year after this, they have their first litter of silver black foxes, which then gets them into fox ranching, which becomes a huge part of their success too. And one of the nice things about Plat Maps is it's not a static thing. You can't just go, oh, this is where the farm is. Because we have multiple years, we can step it forward and say, oh, in 1923, they bought some of their neighbor's land. Oh, in 1930, they've got some more land. Oh, they're expanding. And this might be, in the case of the Fromm brothers, as ginseng farmers, they kind of have to buy new land because once they get a crop of ginseng, you can't plant again on that same crop, and you need land for your pens, for your animals and things like that. But you can also do this with other farms. You can see, the husband dies and his wife is now listed. That's interesting. And then the next one, maybe their son, or maybe they sell it off. You can kind of tell sort of the life of this plot of land, just like looking at a directory, for example, of looking at a city street address or something like that. You can learn a lot about, it's not just like, hey, here's where they are. You can learn a lot more about them over the course of time. So I think that's maybe a good place to stop with the Plat Map story. Hopefully that was helpful in explaining it. I know I was kind of covering a lot of ground there, but there's some interesting stuff and stuff that we don't necessarily think about. I don't think it's necessarily as obvious unless you are someone who lives out in the and has to deal with farms and rural areas. Most people like us, like me, I certainly didn't know the difference between a town and a city until I had to learn it. Hey there. So this is Ben Clark again. I'm, the guy you've been listening to talk for the last, 20 minutes or whatever. In the original live broadcast, I took this moment to, after the discussion of the history, I threw out some more resources as sort of the way to end this. But I was having some technical issues with the process. And so I decided to go back and do a quick re-record for you to just explain this, because I think there's a really, really cool addendum here to the story that we've been telling. So Calvin Cook worked for the Highway Department for Marathon County for about 33 years. And in 1964, he put together this. This is our copy of it, but one of many copies of it that we have. They're like photocopies of photocopies, but still really useful. This is the evolution of the townships for Marathon County, Wisconsin from 1849 to 1910. And I don't know if you call it a document or a booklet or whatever, but what it did is it showed us, here's the map. Here's the map of the county, with the dotted lines showing where the townships are going to become, but also with the solid lines telling us, oh, here's where the boundaries are. There's stuff like the first election, the incorporation of villages and cities, little creation of new townships, all this really great information. I don't know how he went about it, if he was talking to people or I guess he probably had to go through the official minutes of the town board or town boards and the county proceedings and things like that, and every little change between that period from the creation of the county until 1910, he had it documented, and it is a really fascinating document. I don't know how many people recreationally just pull up a book of maps and just go through, but this is actually a pretty cool one because it does tell us a lot. It tells us a lot about the timeline of the county as it grows. We didn't just come out fully formed as the townships and cities and villages as we have today. It took some process. And by looking at it bit by bit, it's really cool because you can see, oh, well, this area develops and then this area develops, and the names that have given and changed, the sort of fights over little bits of land that go back and forth. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can see. And so what I did is I ended up taking basically that, and this part you may remember from the presentation, I digitally approximated it, added some colors, and I basically took it into Photoshop and recreated everything so that it was a little cleaner. And then I ended up taking that stuff. It wasn't just for this presentation. I also put it on our website. So actually, if you want to go, I'll put the link in the description of the video for you to explore if you'd like to. But this is, it's a slideshow that you can click through year by year to see the development. There's a key that explains what all the colors mean, a little bit about the townships and the maps. But yeah. So it's a pretty good resource if you're interested in exploring for yourself, or even just trying to figure out, what did it look like at a certain particular point in time? What did the county look like? There it is. There's also some other resources that I'll just mention real quick here. The public library, the Marathon County Public Library, which we put these programs on in cooperation with. They actually have an online portal that has some Plat material, historic materials, I believe, as well as the, of course, if you're looking today, if you're interested at all in exploring, like I had said at the beginning, there's a wonderful resource that the county has that allows you to explore the townships and the land ownership and all that stuff. So again, I'll put all the links to that in the description, but I just wanted to re-record this and let you know about some other things if you're interested in doing some research. And of course, once we open up and hopefully can have visitors, the public library as well as here our research library, we do have copies of plat maps that we can you can come in and explore and do the research yourself if you're interested in learning more about the county. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.